Joining us today are Meiring Borcherds and James Packman. Meiring's from Mukilteo as their stormwater program manager. Does a lot of work towards water conservation, land preservation. He's worked on many stormwater projects, stream wetland projects, as well as education and outreach. And James is a associate hydrologist with Aspect Consulting, and he's been with Aspect or he's been in the industry for 24 years.
All right, thanks, Don. So we're going to talk a little bit about our program, and we are in the implementation phase. And so just want to go through how we got here and take it from there. So the city of Mukilteo is a map. It's about 6 square miles, just south of Everett, just north of Linwood. If you just for your reference, we have a lot of stormwater owned facilities. We also just went through that this last few months and up that number of 174 quite a bit, but we'll stick with that 174 for now because it sounds better than almost 300. We have a population of about 21,000 people and 12 watersheds that drain to the Sound, and one watershed that actually drains to Lake Washington. So there's 13 watersheds in total in our community. Typical urban watersheds, typical urban hydrology, flashy. We also, because we're on the Sound, we have steep slopes and bad soils. So with that, looking at the source control program, we have looked at the land use. So as you can see, we are not just one kind of land use community. We have multiple land uses in the city, from residential to commercial and industrial. Being that close to Everett, we have quite a few industrial facilities that are suppliers to Boeing and other aviation industries too. But the majority of our community is housing, so single family or multi-family housing. With that, just want to quickly go over the timeline for how we got to where we are today. So the last permit that was issued in 2019 included that we have to implement the source control program. So we started getting our consultants in a row, working through how we're going to implement the program. By 2022, August 2022, we had to have our ordinances in place. So we got that done. We had our inventory program that we went through that James will expand upon a little bit more, getting our inventory rights, and then the enforcement policy also had to be ready to implement in January 2023. And then as January 2023 turned around, we had to have our staff in place. We had to hire an additional staff member, obviously, to help do this work. So we're up and running, and James will take it from here.
Thank you, Meiring. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the steps that we helped the city with to prepare for implementing its source control program. And that last slide that kind of showed the timeline, we've got that in the upper left here just as a guide to help see where we are in the process. And, you know, looking at that timeline in the upper left, from the issuance of the permit to implementing the source control program, it just seems pretty linear. First, you do an ordinance, then you figure out your inventory, then you figure out how you're going to enforce it, and then you start implementing it. But it's not as linear as it may seem. At least that's not how we experienced it and helped the city of Mukilteo plan for it. So after the permit was issued, one of the first steps the city did was an implementation step where they started looking at what software they might use to help track and manage their source control work. And then the city prepared an initial inventory, which we'll get into, inventory of sites, I should say. We'll get into a little bit that in the next couple of slides. And then there was this process to prepare a budget for city council to estimate, for city council approval, to estimate the cost for implementing the program, both planning for and implementing the program. Ultimately, that request went to city council in July of 2021, and it passed, and we were off to the races. So one of the first steps that the city went through was to think about how to build a team for the source control program. So here's a listing of the staff that was there at the time. It included a project manager, one person in the planning side of things, a GIS staff person, 2 people in finance, as well as involving the city council, planning commission, land use committee, and other governance entities within the city to get their buy-in early in the process. The city brought on Aspect Consulting for support. And one of the first things we did was look at the inventory of sites they had developed initially, which I'll explain a little bit more in just a moment. But some of the key pieces of information that we used were business license data from the Department of Revenue, and then also the Source Control Inspection Program Guidance Manual from the Washington Stormwater Center, which came out, was it last year or the year before, but they've been adding updates and more information along the way. So that was a very helpful resource. All right, so for the source control ordinance, you can see in the upper left, that's where we are in the process, and the ordinance, the dark red circle. This involved multiple stages of preparing ordinance language, having it reviewed by a number of different entities, and then revising that language and moving on to the next review. So that included an infrastructure committee based to give them an informal introduction to the ordinance and the source control program and the need for it in the municipal stormwater permit. And we looked at existing municipal code changes for these types of programs to have some good examples to work from. One of the best that we found actually was City of Kirkland. So we're glad to hear that, Jenny. And then we had, as I mentioned, a series of revisions to the municipal code. And so the reviews included by people in different departments of the city, Public Works and Planning, as well as ultimately legal counsel reviewing the final draft. And as I mentioned, the city council hearing, I think that was a mistake on the previous slide. It was actually June of 2022 that was passed. All right, so that's the ordinance development. Now let's talk about the inventory of sites. The city created an initial inventory of sites in 2020 before they brought Aspect on, and they identified approximately 250 businesses with interest to the stormwater source control program. It was based mostly on GIS, land use, and reviewed by city staff who had local on the ground knowledge, which is completely invaluable. And what we did once Aspect came on, the city asked us to take a look at the inventory and do a revision and update to it. So our approach, which we agreed with the city, was to take a different approach and focus on business license data rather than just data based from land use and GIS, and looking at the industrial classification codes. We verified the inventory by a little bit of web searching, Google street walking, as we sometimes call it. And we had a long discussion about whether or not to include home-based businesses. The permit gives leeway for this. And I mentioned this in the previous presentation earlier this morning. So ultimately, the city decided not to include home-based businesses, but that's a decision point that each permittee can make by itself. And in addition, the city wanted to inspect all of the qualifying businesses during the permit period. And this is something I think it's worth mentioning because the permit, again, gives leeway for how this can be implemented. You have to inspect a minimum of 20% of the number of businesses on your list, but those can be repeat visits if necessary to the same business. The city's approach was like, no, all these businesses are of interest to us, so we want to make sure that we inspect them all. So here is the summary of what we came up with the revised inventory effort, a total of just over 1,200 business license records. And then we identified 345 that had qualifying industrial classification code. And we subtracted out some of the quality control steps we did where we found a few duplicates, as well as some businesses that were out of business or no longer there. And in the end, the final number is 327 qualifying businesses. All right, so moving on to the enforcement policy. Again, you can see in the upper left, our timeline, we're shifting to the yellow dot for the enforcement policy. This is also a necessary step that the permit requires, specifically to develop a progressive enforcement policy. And the goals were to create this policy as guidance for city staff, not just a reiteration of municipal code. And the point of enforcement is not to go into a business and say right away, you could get fined or worse, but rather to provide assistance and build a relationship with that business. And as a last resort, enforcement can come into play if it's needed. But it's important to have that policy as a backup, but that's not the very first step. And in addition, because this is publicly funded, public agency, it's important to have transparency in that process. And speaking of the process, what we did was we used some existing examples of enforcement, both enforcement language and procedures, as well as examples of scenarios that might play out, common scenarios. Again, we focused on technical assistance, and it was important to align that enforcement policy with the source control ordinance, the updated municipal code for the city. Of course, an important step in the enforcement is including that in staff training. So from there, I believe I hand it back to Meiring, who's going to tell us about some of the implementation steps.
Thank you, James. So the reporting templates that we basically use most of the reporting templates that was developed through Washington State University, field forms, customized those a little bit more towards what we needed in Mukilteo, but used the templates. We worked with James coming up with standard letters that we would have we use SmartGov software. So we have all our inspection forms, the field notes, and the letters all in SmartGov. So as you go into the inspection, you have all the material there, and you can directly, after your inspection, quickly enter your data and respond to the customer if needed to, if they had any issues or failures during the inspection. And all of this was very important to streamline the inspections. As you know, if you have to do a lot of inspections, your time is your enemy. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you streamline your process, you have a process in place so you can get from point A to point Z much quicker. So the business resources we used, I have the website. We put all our business resources on our website, and I clicked it there. So afterwards, when you get the presentation, you can just click on that and go to our website and see all the resources that we have there. But mainly they refer back to Washington University's resources that's also available. The information links for businesses and non-English language is one of our largest Achilles heels, because a lot of the businesses in town, especially on the restaurant side, they don't have a lot of English-speaking staff at the facility. So we are trying to figure out how to work through that challenge of non-English language education material. We also used postcards for notifying. So in the beginning of the year, so in January, we sent out postcards to all the facilities that we were going to be inspecting this year, so that they knew that we were coming at some point this year to inspect their facility. And then we contact each facility the week before we're going to be coming out to inspect them. We only have 50. I have to say this, we only have 50 per year. So 20% of our facilities we have to do is 50 a year. So it's not like some communities that have 400 a year they have to do, or 1,000 a year they have to do. So we have 50 a year we have to do. So it is more manageable for the city of Mukilteo to do a little bit more work up front. So the inspection process, as I said, we have 50 inspections. We're almost done with them. We have 4 left for the year. We're trying to do joint inspections with the other city departments or with other county departments. So instead of us going out and calling the restaurant saying we want to come and do your source control inspection, we are trying to team up with some of the other departments that also have to go out and do inspections, therefore reducing the taxation on the time of the business owner for doing a walkthrough with different entities to look at things that they have to comply with. We've just started that. As we're 4 months into it. Some departments or agencies just don't want to do that because there's legal reasons for doing so. But we are trying to do that with as many other groups as we can. So that's one thing that we've improved on our inspection process. The other thing is focus on the business types. So because we only have 250-ish businesses that we want to inspect in our permit term, we broke them down into categories. So in 2023, we're focusing on restaurants and food services. In 2024, we're planning on doing auto repair, auto mechanics, looking at that sector. The reason for that is the inspector can then zone in on the BMPs that goes with that type of business. So the inspector can familiarize themselves with the BMPs, gather even more education material to give to the business owner. So we found this to be very helpful instead of just bouncing around and complicating your life for yourself. And then the business information that's available to businesses for inspection. We've put it all on our website. We mail it out to the folks. We approach this in a 100% educational process, not as an enforcement process. So some takeaways, what we did well and what we did not do well. So the slide is about what we think we did well, or what worked well, is the right team. All right, so anything in stormwater depends on the team. So making sure you have the right team to help you build the program and then implement the programs, making sure your staff is well versed with working with the public, well versed in the topic and in the education material that goes out to the customer. Do lots of touch bases with the customer and the stakeholders. Like I said, we are a smaller community, so we can afford a little bit more time with the stakeholders and the customers. So we do as many outreaches as we can before we come out and then after if needed. Understand the business specific BMP needs. Like I said in the previous slide, that's why we focused on business sectors so that we could understand the business needs and the specific pollutants from those business types and help guide them to using the best management practices on site to reduce pollutants leaving their site. Be ready to give resources to the facility. Again, when the inspector shows up in their vehicle, they have the majority of the resources. So they don't have to leave and come back or have a second contact with the business owner. Again, every time the business owner has contact with you, you're taking away time from them to do their business. So having everything with you as much as possible. Sometimes you need to go back and forth a little bit. Identifying staffing needs. So Rome wasn't built in a day. So you have to identify the needs of your staff. So what educational needs they have, what resources they need. So you can make sure you empower your staff to then empower your customers. Budget schedule, very important. In the beginning, we looked at what the budget requirements for running the program. And then since then, we've learned that we need to add a little bit more to resources, right? Education resources. So we have money to build the program, to educate the customers, educate the business owners. And then meeting other permit requirements. So trying to, while you're out at the site, see if there's other things that you can look at the business as part of your permit requirements. So you, again, you reduce the amount of contact with the business. Some hurdles. So obviously when you go and inspect someone's business, sometimes you are confronted with a not so friendly person. So one of the things we did is we bought some fish chocolates. So when we go out and we meet with the person, they get a little candy, a chocolate fish to sweeten the deal. And on there is the contact information. So even if they unwrap their fish to have a snack at lunchtime, they're reminded of who to call if they have a source control problem. Then get to know your neighbors. So our inspector went out to neighboring communities and county staff and did some shadow inspections with them. Not only did he learn a lot from them, but I think they got something from Zachariah too, because Zachariah actually comes from a health department inspecting background. So I think that was really helpful for all to learn from each other. And as you did yesterday in your source control workshop, that's why you go to the workshop, right? So you can learn from your neighbors and learn from your peers. Find inspection software. This is a biggie for Mukilteo. So we used SmartGov. We manipulated SmartGov to help us with the needs for running the program. And again, if you manipulate software, it's not always going to give you a friendly output. So one of our biggest problems is we want to get specific asset management software for our stormwater program, because we do find it hard to work with manipulating software to meet your needs. It just makes it a little bit harder with the communication with customers. And for this specific software, it's hard to do the inspections because the desktop version and the mobile version, they don't look the same, right? Things are in different places. Because we have to train our brain how to click in different spaces on forms, it's kind of disorientating to work on your desktop and then on your mobile app in the field. So that's a hurdle that we have to overcome, and we'll work on that in the future. And like I said, another hurdle was we didn't have enough outreach education and outreach money available, so we've increased that a little bit, and maybe we'll do some more next year. With that, the reason why that cost us a little bit more is we actually went out and we bought a large number of spill kits, from small 5-gallon, 12-gallon to 28-gallon spill kits that we have with us in the vehicle. So if the facility that we're inspecting doesn't have a spill kit, or it's an insufficient spill kit, we actually give it to them. We're paying for that. So we're helping to educate folks to use spill kits correctly, and we initially give them a spill kit that they can use to make sure, because again, that one spill and that one catch basin can eliminate your program for that sub watershed you're working in with one spill, right? So we want to make sure that when we work with our folks, we give them the tools to do the right thing. And then the other thing that we found, even through the business identification process, things were eliminated. And so what we did in the beginning of January, because we're a small community, we had the fortunate opportunity to have the time to actually do a windscreen review of all the businesses on our list. So we were actually able to drive around, make sure that all these businesses that we were going to inspect were still there. And because this program is ever evolving, every year you're going to have to do that. So just don't expect that if you call Johnny's Auto, that Johnny Auto will still be there. It might now be Pete's Auto. All right. So you have to make sure that you go through your business inventory all the time, every year, to review what you have, and to make sure that when you go there, you are speaking to the right business and the right people. So those were some of the hurdles. And with that, any questions?